The gun was on the table before Marta Kowalska even understood what she was looking at. "Get down," Vincent Marchetti said, low and fast, already pulling her behind the booth as the diner's front window exploded inward in a spray of glass and streetlight. She hit the floor hard, his arm braced over her, his body between her and the door. Somewhere behind the counter, a coffee pot shattered. "Who are you people?" Marta gasped, glass in her hair, heart slamming against her ribs. "Why is someone shooting at a diner?" Vincent didn't answer. He was staring at the man who had just walked calmly through the shattered door, gun lowered, face utterly familiar, a face Vincent had trusted at his own table for 11 years. "Paul," Vincent said quietly, and something in his voice cracked open, a truth Marta didn't understand yet, but would soon, to understand how a Boston diner ended up full of broken glass, and how the woman who had served coffee to a mafia boss for 6 months without knowing it ended up the only person he trusted in the world. "We need to go back to the night Marta walked into Sal's diner for her very first shift." Marta Kowalska had been in Boston for 11 months, and every single day of it had felt like running uphill in the rain. She had come from Krakow with 2 suitcases, $400, and a nursing degree that meant nothing here until she paid thousands of dollars and passed exams in a language she was still learning at 11 at night, after her shifts, with a battered textbook and a highlighter worn down to a nub. Back home she had been Marta Kowalska, RN, respected on her hospital floor. Here she was Marta, the new girl, the one with the accent, the one who apologized too much and understood American slang about a beat too late to laugh along with everyone else. She worked 2 jobs, mornings and afternoons, at a laundromat, folding other people's clothes for $6 above minimum wage. Nights at Sal's Diner in East Boston, a 24-hour joint with cracked vinyl booths and a neon sign that buzzed like an angry wasp. She sent money home every month to her mother, who was recovering from a hip surgery Marta hadn't been able to fly home for because a plane ticket cost more than 2 weeks of wages and there was no version of the math that worked. "You look like you haven't slept since Tuesday," said Denise, the diner's other night waitress, a broad, warm woman who had worked at Sal's for 15 years and had adopted Marta the way some people adopt strays, without asking permission, simply deciding it was going to happen. Denise brought her leftover pie. Denise covered her shifts when the nursing exam schedule collided with the diner's. Denise was, some nights, the only person Marta spoke to in a language she felt safe making mistakes in. "I'm fine," Marta said, refilling ketchup bottles with the assembly line efficiency of someone who had learned to make her hands busy so her mind wouldn't spiral. "Just tired. The exam is in 3 weeks. You'll pass it," Denise said. "And then you'll leave us for some fancy hospital and forget all about Sal's." Marta smiled, the first real one of her shift. "I would never forget the pie." There was one regular Marta had noticed over her first weeks, a quiet man who came in most nights around 11, always alone, always in the same corner booth, always ordering black coffee and eggs he barely touched. He tipped generously, said little, and radiated a stillness that made the other staff a little nervous around him, though none of them had ever explained why. Marta simply thought he seemed sad, in the specific, held-together way some people carry sadness like a job they've gotten very good at. She had no idea his name carried enough weight in Boston to empty a room. She had no idea that every other server at Sal's had figured out, within their first week on the job, exactly who Vincent Marchetti was, and had adjusted their behavior around him accordingly. Nervous smiles, too quick service, a kind of performance of deference that men in his world had learned to expect and, secretly, to distrust. Marta simply treated him like every other tired man who came in at 11 o'clock wanting eggs he wouldn't finish and coffee that stayed warm long enough to matter. She had no idea that this, of all things, was about to change both their lives. Vincent Marchetti ran the largest criminal organization on the East Coast north of New York, and he had built it on a single, brutal lesson. Everyone who gets close enough to know you eventually gets close enough to hurt you. He had learned that lesson 3 times, once from a partner who sold information to the feds for a lighter sentence, once from a cousin who skimmed off the top for 6 years before anyone noticed, and once, most painfully, from a woman he had loved before he understood what love cost men like him. She had left the day she learned what he really did for a living, taking with her the last version of Vincent that had believed softness and survival could coexist. Now Vincent was 41 years old, and he ran his empire the way a surgeon runs an operation, precisely, coldly, and with absolutely no tolerance for anything he could not control. His men feared him, his rivals respected him, and Vincent trusted almost no one, because in his experience, the moment someone learned who he really was, they stopped seeing him and started seeing an opportunity to profit from him, to manipulate him, or to destroy him before he could destroy them first. "You spend too much time at that diner," his consigliere, Paul Renzi, told him one evening, not for the first time. Paul had been at Vincent's side for 11 years, since Vincent's father's era, a steady, careful presence who had helped guide the young boss through his roughest transitions of power. Vincent trusted Paul more than he trusted anyone, which, by Vincent's own count, still wasn't very far. "It's quiet," Vincent said. "I like quiet. You like that they don't bow to you there." Vincent didn't answer, because Paul was right, and Vincent hated when Paul was right. The truth was simpler and lonelier than Paul understood. At Sal's diner, surrounded by cracked vinyl and the smell of burnt coffee, nobody adjusted their spine when Vincent Marchetti walked in. Nobody's smile turned brittle with fear. For 40 minutes a night, he got to be a tired man eating eggs he didn't want, instead of the machine everyone else needed him to be. There was one waitress, new, quiet, with an accent she seemed almost embarrassed by, who had never once flinched around him, never once oversmiled or underspoken the way people did when they knew exactly who was sitting in their section. She refilled his coffee without ceremony. She asked once if he was okay, in a tone that suggested she genuinely wanted to know, not because she was managing him, but because she noticed he looked tired, the way anyone might notice a stranger look tired. "No one touches me. No one gets close enough to use it against me later." That was the rule Vincent had built his whole adult life around. He did not yet understand that the woman refilling his coffee every night was about to become the one exception his rule had never accounted for. Not because she wanted in, but because she had no idea there was anything to want into. It happened on a Thursday, just past midnight, during what should have been an unremarkable shift. A man Marta didn't recognize burst through Sal's front door, breathing hard, blood soaking through his shirt sleeve, eyes wild with panic. Every other customer froze. Denise dropped a tray. The cook backed toward the kitchen door like he intended to disappear through it. Even Vincent, seated in his usual booth, went very still in a way Marta would later understand was its own kind of danger. The stillness of a man calculating exits and threats in the same half-second. Marta moved before she decided to move. "Sit him down, here, now," she said, already pulling napkins and the diner's dusty first aid kit from behind the counter, her voice snapping into the clipped, efficient tone she hadn't used since her last shift on a hospital floor in Krakow. "Someone call 911. "No," the bleeding man gasped. "No cops. No cops, please." Marta's hands didn't stop moving even as her mind caught up to what he was telling her. She pressed a folded cloth hard against the wound on his forearm, applying direct pressure with the calm authority of someone who had done this 100 times under far worse conditions, in a hospital that had once run out of supplies during a difficult winter. "This is deep, but the artery isn't hit or you'd already be unconscious," she said, working fast. "You're lucky. Someone hold this exactly where I have it. Tight, don't move it." Denise, hands shaking, held the compress where Marta placed them. Marta rapped, checked his pulse, elevated the arm, all while the man's panicked friend hovered uselessly, and everyone else in the diner remained frozen, watching a stranger take charge of a scene none of them understood. Vincent Marchetti had not moved from his booth. He was watching Marta with an intensity that had nothing to do with the injured man and everything to do with the woman treating him. Steady hands, sharp instructions, absolutely no hesitation, no panic, no deference to anyone in the room, including, notably, him. When the bleeding man was stable, wrapped, and calm enough to be walked to a car by his friend rather than an ambulance, at his own frantic insistence, Marta finally straightened, breathing hard, adrenaline draining out of her in a shaky rush. "Someone should still call for help," she said to the room, a little breathless. "He needs stitches, not just a wrap." "He'll get them," Vincent said quietly, standing now, his eyes fixed on her in a way that made Marta suddenly, belatedly self-conscious. "Who are you?" he asked, not unkindly, genuinely. I'm just the waitress," Marta said, gesturing vaguely at her apron, at the mess of blood-soaked napkins on the counter. "I used to be a nurse. Back home." Vincent studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes that Marta couldn't read. and wouldn't understand for weeks. The rare, unfamiliar sensation of watching someone act with total competence and zero performance, zero awareness that the man she just helped keep calm was someone whose name alone could clear a restaurant. "Thank you," he said simply, and left a $100 bill on the counter before walking out into the night. Marta stared at the bill, baffled. "That's a big tip for eggs he didn't even finish," she told Denise, who had gone very quiet, watching Vincent's retreating back with an expression Marta had never seen on her before. "Marta," Denise said carefully, "you really don't know who that is, do you?" "Should I?" Denise opened her mouth, then closed it again. "No," she said finally. "No, I don't think you should worry about it. If you're already hooked on this one, drop a like now. It helps more than you know, and this story is about to get a lot more complicated." Vincent came back to Sal's the next night, and the night after that, and within 2 weeks, something had shifted into an unspoken rhythm neither of them named out loud. He started staying longer. He started actually eating the eggs. Once, when Marta's shift ran late because a delivery truck blocked the loading dock and she missed her last bus, Vincent, without fanfare, without any indication he expected anything for it, had one of his drivers take her home, presenting it so casually, she assumed it was simply a diner courtesy she hadn't known about. "You didn't have to do that," she told him the next night, uncomfortable with feeling like she owed something she couldn't name. "I know," Vincent said. "I wanted to. I don't need looking after," Marta said, a little sharper than she intended, old instincts flaring, the instinct of a woman who had spent 11 months proving over and over that she could carry her own weight in a country that kept assuming otherwise. "I've survived worse than a missed bus." Vincent almost smiled. "Almost." "Understood," he said, and never offered again without asking first, which, Marta noted, was somehow more respectful than the gesture itself had been. One slow night, rain hammering the diner's windows, Vincent told her something he had never told a stranger. "I had someone once," he said, staring into his coffee. "Before all this got complicated, she left when she found out what I really was. Not because I did anything to her, because she couldn't stop seeing what I could do once she knew." He glanced up. "You've never asked me what I do for a living, should I?" Marta asked, genuinely puzzled. Most people would have looked it up by now. Marta shrugged, wiping down the counter beside his booth. "You come in, you're quiet, you tip well, you look like you're carrying something heavy. That's what I know. I figure if you wanted me to know more, you'd tell me." She paused. "Also, I work 2 jobs and study nursing exams until 1 in the morning. I don't exactly have time to investigate my customers." Vincent laughed. A real laugh, low and surprised, the kind Paul Renzi hadn't heard from him in over a year. Later, when a drunk customer got aggressive with Denise over a wrong order, grabbing her wrist hard enough to leave a mark, it was Marta again who moved first, stepping between them, voice steady and cold in a way that surprised even her. "Let go of her now," she said, and something in her tone, some old hospital floor authority that had once talked down panicked families and violent patients alike, made the man release Denise and stumble back, muttering, before Sal himself came around the counter to throw him out. Vincent had half risen from his booth, ready to intervene, and found he hadn't needed to. He sat back down slowly, watching Marta check on a shaken Denise with the same brisk, unglamorous competence she'd shown treating a stranger's stab wound weeks earlier. She doesn't perform strength for anyone's benefit, Vincent thought. She simply has it, and uses it, and moves on. It was, he realized with quiet unease, the first time in over a year he had wanted to protect someone rather than simply control the danger around them. Paul Renzi had served 2 generations of the Marchetti family, and he had never once, in 11 years, questioned Vincent's judgment out loud. He questioned it plenty in private. He's spending 4 nights a week at a diner in East Boston, Paul told Sal Costanza, no relation to the diner, a rival capo from the Provenza family, over drinks in a room with no cameras and, Paul had made very sure, no listening ears, eating eggs, talking to a waitress like she's his therapist. Meanwhile, the Provenza shipment routes are sitting open because Vincent won't move them. Too worried it'll spook the feds. Sounds like a man who's lost his nerve, Sal Costanza said carefully, watching Paul's face for exactly the reaction he wanted. Sounds like a man who needs someone steadier running things, Paul said, before the whole organization gets left behind by people willing to actually act. It had started smaller than this. A debt Paul owed the Provenza family from a bad bet, years old, quietly compounding. The kind of thing a proud man doesn't confess to a boss he's supposed to be advising, not managing. Then it became something else. A genuine gnawing belief that Vincent's caution, his refusal to expand into riskier territory, his newfound distraction over a diner waitress of all things, was going to leave the whole Marchetti organization vulnerable to families who weren't playing it safe. Paul told himself, most nights, that this was loyalty of a different kind, that removing Vincent quietly, cleanly, with Provenza backing, and installing himself as a steadier hand was, in its own way, protecting everything Vincent's father had built. He told himself many things. None of them made it not a betrayal. What Paul hadn't accounted for was Marta. She noticed things the men around Vincent had stopped noticing, because familiarity breeds blindness. And Paul had been part of the furniture of Vincent's life for over a decade. Marta, an outsider to all of it, noticed the way Paul's eyes lingered a half-second too long on Vincent's phone when it buzzed at the diner. She noticed how Paul's questions to Denise and Sal, framed as friendly small talk, always circled back to Vincent's schedule, his routines, the diner's exits and hours. That man who comes in with your friend sometimes, Marta mentioned once to Vincent, carefully, not wanting to overstep. Older, gray suit. He asks a lot of questions for someone who's supposed to already know all the answers. Vincent's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. What kind of questions? When you usually leave, whether you come alone. Once he asked Sal if this place has a back exit. Marta shrugged, refilling his cup. Maybe it's nothing. I don't know how these things work. I just noticed. Vincent said nothing for a long moment. Then, keep noticing. It happened 3 nights later, entirely by accident. Marta had stepped into the diner's back alley to take out the trash near the end of her shift, the November air sharp and cold against her face, when she heard voices on the other side of the loading dock wall, low, urgent, unmistakably Paul Renzi's. Friday night, at the warehouse meeting, that's when it happens. Provenza's men move in from the south entrance, the second Vincent's alone with me. Clean, fast, no witnesses. I take over the transition the same night, tell everyone he stepped back for health reasons. No one questions it if I'm the one delivering the news. And the girl? A second, unfamiliar voice asked. The waitress. Does she know anything? She's an immigrant who barely speaks the language and doesn't know Vincent's last name means anything, Paul said, dismissive. She's not a factor. If anything, she's useful. Keeps him distracted, off his guard, exactly where I want him. Marta stood frozen behind the dumpster, trash bag forgotten in her hand, her heart pounding so loud she was certain it would give her away. Friday night, the warehouse, south entrance, he's going to kill him. She thought of Vincent's tired eyes over eggs he never finished. She thought, with sudden sickening clarity, of every small detail she had dismissed as harmless. The man's careful questions, his too friendly small talk, the way he had smiled at her like she was nothing worth worrying about. She had 6 hours until her shift ended, no way to reach Vincent directly, and a decision to make that could get her killed for knowing too much, or could save the life of a man she had never once, in 6 months, thought to look up. This is not my world, she thought, hands shaking as she backed slowly away from the wall. But it is now. She went back inside, finished her shift with a steady, terrified calm that Denise, focused on closing tickets, never noticed, and the moment her shift ended, she asked Sal, who, it turned out, had known exactly who Vincent was the entire time, and had simply respected Marta's ignorance as its own kind of safety. For the number of the driver, who sometimes picked Vincent up, Vincent listened to Marta's account twice, his face unreadable, before he said a single word. You're sure it was Paul's voice? I've served him coffee for 6 months, Marta said, still shaking from adrenaline and cold. I know his voice. Vincent was quiet for a long, terrible moment. Then he made a call, low and clipped, rearranging the entire structure of Friday's meeting without revealing to a single person outside Marta and 2 trusted men exactly why. You're not going anywhere near that warehouse, Vincent told Marta firmly. I wasn't planning to, she said, but I'm not hiding at home pretending I didn't hear it either. If something happens to you and I said nothing, I don't think I survived that, Vincent. Not the guilt of it. Friday night, the warehouse sat quiet and cold under sodium lights, exactly as Paul had arranged. Except Vincent arrived with two men Paul didn't expect, positioned exactly where Paul's Provenza contacts weren't prepared for. And Paul himself walked in expecting a transition of power and found, instead, Vincent Marchetti standing calmly in the center of the loading bay, waiting. "Vincent," Paul said, his composure cracking at the edges. "This isn't what it—" "Save it," Vincent said, voice even, cold in the way that had made grown men flinch for 2 decades. "I know about the debt to Provenza. I know about Friday. I know about the south entrance." He let that sit. "What I want to know, Paul, 11 years in, is when exactly you decided I was worth less than whatever they promised you to hand me over." "You've gone soft," Paul said, some old buried resentment finally surfacing, raw and unguarded. "Eating eggs at a diner 4 nights a week while the Provenza family expands into territory that used to be ours without contest. You used to move like your father. Now you move like a man waiting to retire." "Careful," Vincent said quietly. "Confusing caution with weakness has cost smarter men than you everything they had." Provenza's men, expecting an ambush of their own making, found themselves instead surrounded and vastly outnumbered, Vincent's rearranged plan having accounted for exactly this outcome. There was no gunfire. There was, instead, something colder. Vincent laid out, in precise and unhurried detail, every piece of evidence his men had quietly gathered in the 6 days since Marta's warning. Bank transfers, recorded calls, the debt records themselves, until Paul had nowhere left to stand, except in the wreckage of his own choices. "You get to walk out of this building," Vincent said finally. "That's the only mercy 11 years of loyalty earns you. But you're done, not just with this organization, with this city. If I see your face in Boston again, the mercy runs out." Paul left that warehouse a broken man rather than a dead one. Proportional, precise, exactly as calculated as everything else Vincent did. Word moved fast through Vincent's world, the way it always did. Not the details, but the shape of it. The consigliere, who tried to move against the boss, and the immigrant waitress, whose sharp eyes had stopped it before it started. When Vincent walked into Sal's diner the following Monday, something had shifted in the room in a way Marta didn't immediately understand. Denise, Sal, even the cook, all of them treated her with a new, careful respect, the kind reserved for someone who had, without meaning to, proven herself in a world with rules none of them fully understood. "You could have just let it happen," Vincent said quietly. Once the diner had cleared out, and it was just the two of them, the neon sign buzzing faithfully outside. "You didn't know me long. You had every reason to stay out of it." "I did know you," Marta said simply. "Maybe not what you do, or who you are to everyone else. But I knew the man who tips well and eats eggs he doesn't like, and got quiet whenever anyone asked about someone he lost once. That was enough for me to know you didn't deserve what Paul had planned." Vincent reached across the counter, not to take her hand, just to rest his own beside it, close enough that the gesture spoke for itself. "I built my whole life around never trusting anyone who already knew who I was," he said. "Every single person who's ever hurt me learned my name first and decided what to do with it after. You never did that. You just saw me before you knew any of it." "I still barely know any of it," Marta said, a small, tired smile breaking through. "I know you run something big. I know people are scared of you. I still don't fully understand why. And honestly, Vincent, I'm not sure I want a detailed explanation over eggs at midnight." He laughed, quiet and real. "Fair enough." Weeks later, Marta passed her nursing licensing exam, the letter arriving on a gray Tuesday morning that she read 3 times before she let herself believe it. She called her mother in Krakow first, crying into the phone in a mixture of Polish and English that made no sense to anyone but the two of them. And then, hesitant, she called Vincent. He showed up at her apartment that evening with a bottle of champagne and, more surprisingly, with Denise and Sal in tow, having apparently coordinated a small, chaotic celebration that spilled out of Marta's tiny kitchen and into the hallway, her elderly neighbor eventually joining in simply because the noise was too joyful to resist. "To Nurse Kowalska," Vincent said, raising his glass, and the words settled into Marta's chest like something she'd been waiting 11 months to hear. Later, after everyone had gone, Vincent lingered in her doorway, uncharacteristically unsure of himself. "I don't know how to do this the normal way," he admitted. "Court someone, be someone's partner without it costing them something dangerous. I've spent so long assuming closeness gets people hurt. I don't have a map for what happens after Paul, after all of it. for what it looks like to just be with someone, plainly, without calculating the risk every hour. Then we figure it out plainly, Marta said. One shift, one exam, one quiet dinner at a time. I didn't survive coming to this country with nothing to be scared off by a learning curve now. Vincent smiled, the rare, unguarded smile Denise had first noticed months ago and never quite gotten used to. And for the first time since the night everything nearly ended in a warehouse under sodium lights, Boston felt, to both of them, less like a battlefield and more like a place they might actually build something in. If Marta's fearless heart and Vincent's hard-won trust got to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments. Did you suspect Paul before the warehouse scene, or did his betrayal catch you completely off guard? Stay close because part 2 is coming and Provenza isn't done yet.